Hi guys, welcome to the next segment at Cigarsindia.in, India's largest and trusted online cigar store. Now the guys at Cigarsindia.in asked me to do just a brief guide on selecting cigars. So I've made some notes which I'll go through and hopefully will provide you with an idea, depending on your experience, about buying cigars in India. I've broken it down into three segments. You have the novice smoker, you have the intermediate smoker, and you have the seasoned smoker. Generally, I hope to cover certain cigars or certain things which would be of use to all the groups, whether they're novice, whether they're intermediate, or whether they're seasoned cigar smokers. I personally have found, after smoking for 17 years, that there's always something I can learn, and I'll only stop learning the day I die. So before I start that, I'd also like to send a shout out to my friend Brijesh in Pune. Thank you very much for your comment, I appreciate that. My name is Temujin, friends call me Tem, please call me Tem. And the guys, Abhilash and Joy, are at Cigarsindia.in. They'll also be able to sort out any requests that you have. So thanks for that, Brijesh. I hope we're working towards what you want, and if you have any further suggestions or guides, please feel free to let us know. Anyway, back to the topic. Starting off at the novice, there are a number of issues that I think you'd want to actually consider before going on this trip of smoking a cigar. First is cost. The second is time, and third, the variety and the inexperience, which all play important factors. Now, looking at the cost, that can be broken down into another area as to whether you want cheap cigars, which are typically machine-made, or handmade premium cigars. My advice to you as a guy or lady who hasn't smoked any cigar at all, to try it and try something reasonably small and reasonably priced, because if you don't enjoy it, that's a waste of your resources, and I don't think you'd be keen on that. So I would suggest try a small cigar to begin with, preferably handmade, because there is a difference between machine-made cigars and handmade cigars. Again, I'll get to those in another review at some point, sorting out the differences, but this is just one category which reflects in the cost. You typically find that machine-made cigars are significantly cheaper than handmade cigars. Having said that, may not be representative of a good cigar, which you may enjoy and which may put you off smoking cigars if you try a cheap handmade cigar. I won't go into any kind of particular names here, but that's an issue to consider. And that's all I would have to say on that. If at the least have a lighter, a good lighter, and possibly a cigar cutter, which shouldn't cost much. The guys at Cigarsindia.in have a nice, if you could just show me the guillotine cutter, please, lads. This is a very nice, nicely constructed and solid guillotine cutter, which gives you a nice cut. It retails here from between 650 to 850 rupees. So that and a lighter. Now again, you may not need any of these fancy lighters. I mean, this is a beautiful Cohiba lighter with a jet turbo flame. But if you're into cigars, you want to get into them, maybe as a next investment, you may want to purchase something like that, but you shouldn't be in any way restricted by that at the moment. What you need to do now is actually just enjoy the beauties and the characteristics of the cigar itself. So in terms of lighters, what I would suggest is to get a normal butane lighter. Don't go for any of the petrol fill lighters. In fact, you can even use a spill of wood. Again, if it's preferably cedar wood, but any type of wood which you light, and that light ignites the cigar itself. So that covers the lighter, the humidor, and the cutter. And next I will be reviewing or covering the types of cigars that I would recommend if you are new to smoking cigars. I've broken this down into two distinct groups, Cuban and non-Cuban. I've described, or I list 3 Cuban varieties and 3 non-Cuban varieties. And for the non-Cuban varieties, I've subsplit them into three categories: the Dominican Republic, Honduras, and Nicaragua. So for the novice, excuse me, my throat's a bit dry. So for a novice and the Cuban varieties, bearing in mind you're looking for a small cigar rather than the large ones, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, I would suggest something like a Rafael Gonzalez, which is a nice introduction to Cuban cigars. It's mild, there's no medium to it. Of course, all tastes vary. Some may find it stronger, but generally it's regarded as a mild smoke, and they're relatively small as well. So you can get a good introduction in a short space of time. The second one is a Monte Cristo, the entire range. Of course, you get different vitolas. Again, going with with what I just said now, I would suggest going for a smaller size one to save time, because you may not have the time to actually smoke it. The final beginner cigar, I could say, is something like a punch, and here I'd say Punch Coronation. Again, it's a reasonably priced cigar, reasonable size as well, so you get some complexity and flavors, and it's a nice introduction. In terms of non-Cuban cigars, I would recommend from three different countries, Davidoff. Again, I'm going for Davidoff because it is a mild and creamy smoke, so it's not harsh and unpleasant, or you don't get this immediate peppery kind of taste which may put you off. This is from the Dominican Republic, and they have a range of sizes in the vitolas, but again I would suggest you go for the smaller and the slender versions to begin with. The second comes from Honduras, and it's the Cuba Libre. Again, an interesting smoke. I think it's a bit more punchier than the Davidoff, but again, I would certainly advise you to give your recommendation on that. Please try the Davidoff, then compare it with the Cuba Libre and see which one you think is stronger, which one is lighter. At the end of the day, all taste is subjective, and there's no one correct or right answer to this. The final one, and the guys at Cigarsindia.in may think I have a vested interest with this company, but I just can't go. There's not enough I can keep saying about Drew Estates, and this one is remarkable. It's the Acid Cuba Cuban. This is a totally different experience altogether, because it's an infused cigar, so you don't have the typical characteristics of a normal cigar, whether it's Cuban or non-Cuban. This actually has a spicy, sweet spice kind of character to it, like cloves or cinnamon, and that's pronounced throughout the cigar. I don't know how the guys do it, but they do a remarkable job. And please, do not get this confused with any of the cheaper varieties of flavored cigars. This in no way reflects that at all. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the intermediate stage next. Hi guys. So in the previous segment I gave a brief idea about what you would want to smoke as a newbie or a novice. Here I go on to the intermediate stage, and I'd start by saying you probably have some experience of smoking cigars, so I really don't need to tell you that much more without you saying, well, you haven't said this or you haven't considered that. So I say fair enough. But if you still want to hear me out, what I would say is that you just try and discover new varieties and vitolas of cigars, different sizes of cigars. For example, you may like a Monte No. 2, which is a torpedo shape. Has a large ring gauge. So I mentioned the Monte Cristo No. 2. Why would you want to smoke that only when you have something like a Monte Cristo No. 4? Again, they're made by the same house, the same brand, Monte Cristo, but they're created for a different reason. And the size and the dimensions of the cigar also affect the smoke of the cigar and your enjoyment of the cigar. Generally, I tend to find that thicker ring gauge cigars, which are longer, tend to have a cooler and more complex kind of draw and character to them. Whereas the smaller the variety, they tend to be much more punchier and give you an immediate impact, because in one way that's what they were meant for. Why also would you want to smoke, say, something like a Robusto size cigar compared to, say, something like a Lancero size, like a Cohiba Lancero, as opposed to a Cohiba Esplendido? Again, the quality and the taste experience is reflected in the dimensions of that cigar. What you're doing with the longer, thinner cigar is actually smoking a high percentage of binder and wrapper leaf in proportion to filler leaf, when you compare that to, say, a fatter, stubbier cigar. So that's a character which certainly affects the certain vitolas of each brand of cigar. So that's the only thing I would suggest. Try smoking the different varieties and get a good understanding of the varieties within each house. Now, in terms of the cigars themselves, going back to my previous example, 3 Cuban varieties which are less well known, which you may want to try, are the H. Upmann. Again, I leave it to you as an intermediate smoker because you're more comfortable with the experience of smoking. You've probably spoken to your friends or colleagues and got a good idea about what it was all about, and you just may want to experience different types of cigars now as well. So these ones are, as I said, the H. Upmann. You may also want to try, which is one of my favorites, the Juan Lopez, and to be specific, the Juan Lopez Selection 2. Amazing smoke, very underrated, very under the radar. And the final one is also another one, Paul Aranyaga, again, a very underrated and not as acknowledged as, say, the Romeo and Julietas, the Monte Cristos, and the Cohibas. So these I would certainly try. I would certainly go with these as they're my, favorites, especially the Juan Lopez. Now, going on to the non-Cubans, I would suggest something like Arturo Fuente, any of their range. You may want to try the Opus X. That depends on your budget and how willing you are to splurge out on those, but the construction can't be faulted, and they have premium cigars coming predominantly from the Dominican Republic. The next variety I would suggest, perhaps if you want something from Honduras, is Nat Sherman, again based in New York, but the source comes from Honduras. They have a nice range. I personally like Hamilton, also the Gotham range, they're quite nice. And the final one of the non-Cubans was the Tatué from Nicaragua. Now, that has an interesting story to it. I'll give you some homework. Either you can do some research on it yourself, or perhaps we'll review it on another occasion when we actually get a cigar with us. So, covered the novice, covered the intermediate smoking profile. The final one would be the seasoned smoker. And again, I'd say there's really not much more I could add, guys, to what you've experienced and had over your years, or varieties and quantity of cigars that you may have tried. The only thing is, I would say, is to make sure that you carry on smoking, and please just try and explore other varieties. Now, going to the specific brands of cigars, again, starting with the Cuban variety, I'm sure you would have tried a Cohiba, but again, try the different sizes, aged Cohibas and non-aged, or relatively fresh or new Cohibas. One of my favorites, the Ramon Allones. Again, it's a very spicy smoke, and I think you need some experience to actually appreciate the nuances in that cigar, even though it initially presents you with this character of pungent spice and a real He-Man kind of cigar. But there are subtleties, and I'm sure that with your experience you'd certainly be able to appreciate that. And Avilash recommended this one, the Bolivar, again, any of the range. Again, this on par with the Ramon Allones. pretty heavyweight cigar, good after a meal, and really good for a seasoned palate. In terms of the non-Cuban varieties, the first one I'd say from the Dominican Republic is the aging room Vitola, and any of the sizes or subcategories within that group. The second one from Honduras, which is CAO, quite a peppery kind of smoke, again more for the seasoned smoker than certainly a novice. It's got a punch to it, and I think you will certainly appreciate it. And finally, I couldn't end without saying Drew Estates. Anything from Drew Estates, whether it's their KFC, Mayuzi Wezetan, Liga Privada, which other ones are there, Kentucky Fire Cured. And they have so many. I haven't tried all of them, and that's the beauty in it. For me, I get this, it's still a learning experience, and I get to see the intricacies and the beauties of those. Oh, I forgot to mention the Cuba Acid, Cuba as well from Drew Estates. So there we have it, guys. These, I've just given you 3 varieties for each kind of group, as it were, of Cuban and non-Cuban. That's just off the top of my head. What I would suggest is, please do get in touch with the guys at Cigarsindia.in, who have a vast knowledge of this and will be in a better position to actually help you out and give you guidance on your journey of experimentation and finding the cigars that you will know and you will one day hopefully love as well. So I hope you like this segment.